The sky above Zalathi Prime turned blood red as massive explosions lit up the atmosphere. Commander Hyun-woo gripped his control panel tighter, watching his screen show one terrible sight after another. The beautiful crystal towers that had stood for thousands of years were falling down like broken glass. Each tower that fell meant hundreds of innocent people were dying. "Commander, look at Sector 7, called out his communications officer, her hands shaking as she pointed at the display. The Zalathi energy warriors were famous across the galaxy for their amazing powers. They could turn their bodies into pure light and shoot energy beams that could cut through solid metal. But now, even these legendary fighters were losing badly. Hyun-woo had seen many battles in his 30 years as a soldier, but nothing like this. The Vorthak ships were everywhere, like angry black insects swarming around dying stars. Their weapons never stopped firing. Every few seconds, another bright light would disappear from his screen. Another hero was dead. Lieutenant Soo-jin ran. Over to him, tears streaming down her face. "Sir, we just got the last message from the Keeper homeworld." Her voice was breaking as she spoke. "The hive minds are going quiet one by one. They're dying, sir. All of them. The Keepers were perhaps the most mysterious race in the galaxy. They shared one giant mind across billions of individuals, making them perfect at working together. When they fought, it was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction. But perfect teamwork meant nothing when facing an enemy with 10 times more ships." Hyun-woo closed his eyes for a moment, trying to block out the sounds of his crew crying and cursing. These weren't just random aliens dying out there. The Zalathi had taught his people how to use clean energy. The Keepers had shared their knowledge of medicine that saved millions of lives. They were friends, allies, family. "What about the ethereals?" he asked quietly, though he already feared the answer. Soo-jin checked her instruments and her face went even paler. "The floating cities of Etheria, they're burning, sir. The ancient ones are making their final stand, but—" She didn't need to finish. Everyone could see the massive fires lighting up the dark space where the ethereal cities used to float peacefully. The ethereals were the oldest race in the galaxy, some of them over 1,000 years old. They could read minds, move objects with their thoughts and predict the future. Their floating cities were works of art that took centuries to build. Now those beautiful cities were turning into funeral pyres, lighting up space with their death. Captain Min-ho stood in the command center of the Coalition flagship, watching the holographic display that showed their desperate situation. Red dots representing enemy ships covered the screen like a disease, while only a few blue dots remained to show the last free forces. The numbers were clear and cruel. For every one of their ships, the enemy had 20. "How many more systems have fallen?" Min-ho asked his tactical officer. 17 in the last hour, sir," came the quiet reply. "The Vorthak aren't just defeating our forces, they're wiping out entire populations. Men, women, children, they don't care." Min-ho had fought in dozens of wars, but this wasn't war anymore. This was extermination. The Vorthak Empire didn't want to rule the galaxy. They wanted to own it completely, with no one left to resist them. His hands trembled as he gave the order that felt like surrender. "Send out the distress beacon. Full power, all frequencies. Broadcast to every corner of the galaxy." "What should the message say, sir?" asked his communications officer. Min-ho looked around at his crew, good people who had fought bravely against impossible odds. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that the greatest civilizations in the galaxy fought with everything they had, and it wasn't enough. Tell them—" his voice caught in his throat. "Tell them we tried our best." The message went out into the cold darkness of space, carrying the last desperate hope of dying civilizations. It spoke of planets burning, of children crying for parents who would never come home, of heroes falling despite their incredible powers. Far away in the command ship of the Vorthak fleet, War Master Theklon watched the final battles with satisfaction. His species had spent centuries building the perfect war machine. Every ship was designed to kill efficiently. Every soldier was trained from birth to show no mercy. They had studied their enemies' weaknesses and exploited them perfectly. "The resistance is broken," reported his second-in-command. "The last coalition fleets are retreating or surrendering." Theclon smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Good. Begin the occupation protocols. Every world will serve the Empire or burn. He had conquered hundreds of planets, enslaved dozens of species. This victory was just another step toward total domination. But, as he celebrated, the distress signal from the dying coalition raced through space at the speed of light, carrying its desperate plea to parts of the galaxy that no one had ever explored. In the vast darkness between stars, that signal would soon reach ears that had never heard of the Vorthak Empire. And those ears belonged to a species that had one very dangerous habit. They never could resist helping someone in trouble. Dr. Jihai had been working at the Deep Space Monitoring Station for 15 years, listening to radio signals from distant stars. Most days, she heard nothing but cosmic static and the occasional signal from human space probes. But today was different. Today she heard something that made her blood run cold. The alien transmission was weak and broken, coming from so far away that it had taken months to reach Earth. But the computers had finally decoded enough of it to understand what they were. Hearing. It was a cry for help, broadcast across the galaxy by dying civilizations. Jihai's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the datapad as she ran through the halls of the Global Defense Council building. Security guards stepped aside as she burst through doors, her lab coat flying behind her. She had to tell someone what she had heard. The emergency meeting room was full of the most powerful people on Earth. Presidents, generals, scientists, and business leaders all turned to look at her as she stumbled through the door, breathing hard from running. "Play the recording," she gasped, connecting her equipment to the room's speakers. The sound that filled the room was unlike anything any human had ever heard. Strange voices speaking in languages that hurt to listen to, filled with pain and desperation. But even though no one could understand the words, everyone could feel the emotion behind them. These beings were dying, and they were begging for someone, anyone, to help them. "What are we listening to?" asked President Taemin, his face pale. Jihi wiped tears from her eyes as she explained what the computers had translated. "It's a distress signal from the other side of the galaxy. Multiple alien civilizations are being wiped out by something called the Vorthak Empire. In just the past month, 12 billion intelligent beings have been killed or enslaved." The room erupted in shocked whispers. General Kang Ho, the head of Earth's military forces, stood up slowly. 12 billion? That's almost twice the population of our entire planet. "The signal is asking for help from anyone who can hear it," Jihai continued. "These civilizations had incredible technology, powers we can't even imagine, but they're losing. They're all dying, and they're asking if anyone out there can help them." President Taemin looked at the star charts on the wall, showing the vast distance to where the signal had come from. Even our fastest ships would take 4 months to reach them, and we don't know anything about their technology or their enemies. We could be flying into a trap, or our weapons might be completely useless against their ships. Defense Minister Wu Jin shook his head. "This isn't our fight. We have our own planet to protect. If there's an empire out there strong enough to destroy entire galactic civilizations, maybe we should stay hidden and hope they never find us." But something strange was already happening across Earth. Even before the government could make any official announcements, word of the alien distress signal had leaked out. Social media exploded with discussions about the dying civilizations. News channels showed the translated portions of the message over and over again, and something awakened in the human spirit that surprised everyone. By the next morning, recruitment centers in every major city were packed with volunteers. Not just soldiers, but ordinary people who had never held a weapon in their lives. Teachers, store clerks, truck drivers, college students. They all wanted to help. Dong Hyun was a cargo ship engineer who had spent 20 years fixing broken freighters at the orbital shipyards. When he heard about the alien distress call, he didn't hesitate. He organized his entire engineering crew to work around the clock, retrofitting civilian ships with whatever weapons and armor they could build. These aliens helped each other fight this evil empire, he told his exhausted crew as they worked their third 18-hour shift in a row. "The least we can do is try to help them, too." At the Samsung spacecraft factory, Yoonji was supposed to be installing entertainment systems in luxury space yachts. Instead, she convinced her entire shift to donate their paychecks toward buying military equipment for the rescue mission. Word spread to other factories, and soon workers across the planet were contributing whatever they could. The response shocked government leaders. In 3 weeks, over 2 million people had volunteered for what everyone knew was probably a suicide mission. Shipbuilders worked day and night to prepare a fleet. Military vessels, cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger liners. Anything that could fly and carry weapons was being converted for war. The luxury cruise ship Pacific Dream was supposed to take rich tourists on scenic trips around the solar system. Instead, Captain J1 had his crew install missile launchers, where the swimming pools used to be. "My grandmother always said that when someone's in trouble, you help them," he explained to his confused staff. "Doesn't matter if they're human or alien." Admiral Young-Soo had commanded Earth's defense fleets for 30 years. He had fought pirates, stopped asteroid impacts, and kept the peace during trade disputes. But he had never seen anything like the fleet that assembled at the edge of the solar system. Over 300 ships of every size and type, crewed by volunteers who had never worked together before. As he looked out at the makeshift armada, Young-Soo felt emotions he couldn't name. Pride in his species, for caring about strangers they had never met. Terror at the thought of what they were about to face, and something else, a fierce determination that reminded him why humans had always been survivors. He opened communications to address the entire fleet. Thousands of voices fell silent as they waited to hear from their commander. "I won't lie to you," Young-Soo said, his voice carrying to every ship. "We're about to jump across the galaxy to fight an enemy we know nothing about. Our weapons might not work. Our ships might not survive the journey. Most of us will probably never see Earth again." He paused, looking out at the stars where somewhere alien civilizations were dying while crying out for help. But someone has to try. Someone has to answer their call. If we don't, who will? The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's answer to a distant cry for help. They didn't know if they would arrive in time, or if they could make any difference against an empire that had already conquered most of the galaxy, but they were going anyway, because that's what humans do when someone needs help. War Master Theclon was having the best day of his military career. His personal quarters aboard the flagship were decorated with trophies from 100 conquered worlds, crystalline sculptures from Zelathi Prime, ancient scrolls from the ethereal libraries, and organic art pieces from the now extinct Keeper colonies. He was reading reports about how quickly his forces were enslaving the surviving populations when everything went wrong. The door to his command chamber burst open so hard it nearly broke off its hinges. His tactical officer, normally a calm and disciplined soldier, ran in looking like he had seen a ghost. "War Master," the officer gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Unknown fleet. They just appeared out of hyperspace at grid 77 Alpha." Theclon set down his victory wine and walked calmly to the main display screen. In over 40 years of conquest, he had seen every type of enemy fleet imaginable. Desperate last stands by dying civilizations, surprise attacks by hidden resistance forces, even suicide runs by fanatic defenders. Nothing surprised him anymore. But what he saw on the screen made absolutely no sense. The approaching fleet looked like someone had raided a junkyard and decided to go to war. There were obvious military vessels mixed in with cargo ships, mining barges, and what his computer was identifying as a passenger cruise liner. One ship appeared to be a luxury yacht with weapons bolted onto its sides. Another looked like a garbage hauler that someone had painted with bright colors. "How many ships?" Theclon asked, trying to count the chaotic formation. "Over 300, sir, but they're not following any known battle formation. Some are flying in loose groups, others are spread out randomly, and that big cruise ship in the center is broadcasting some kind of music." Theclon's second-in-command, a veteran warrior who had helped destroy the Keeper homeworld, stared at the tactical display in confusion. "Sir, I've never seen anything like this. They're not using standard military communications. Their ship formations make no strategic sense, and half of them appear to be civilian vessels." The War Master studied the readings more carefully. His computers were trying to classify the unknown ships, but kept giving error messages. These vessels didn't match any known design in the Vorthak military database, which contained information on every spacefaring race they had ever encountered. "Open communications," Theclon ordered. "Let's see who these fools are before we destroy them." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be a converted pleasure craft. A human face appeared, though Teclon didn't know what species he was looking at. The being looked remarkably calm for someone facing the most feared military force in the galaxy. "Unknown vessels, this is Warmaster Teclon of the Vorthak Empire," he announced in the standard galactic language that all civilized races used for communication. "You are trespassing in conquered territory. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." The response came back in broken, accented galactic standard that sounded like the speaker had learned it from a cheap translation program. "This is Captain J1 of the Pacific Dream," the human said with what looked like a smile. "We got your message loud and clear. We're here to ruin your day." Before Teclon could respond, the communication cut off. The Warmaster turned to his weapons officer, ready to order the destruction of these strange intruders. But what happened next broke every rule of space combat that the Vorthak Empire had perfected over centuries of conquest. The luxury cruise liner accelerated directly toward his heavy cruiser Dominator, which was 3 times its size and armed, with enough firepower to level a city. Instead of trying to outmaneuver or outgun the warship, the cruise liner just rammed straight into it while playing what sounded like classical music at full volume. The impact tore both ships apart, but somehow the humans had managed to aim their collision perfectly. The Dominator's main weapons array exploded in a chain reaction that took out 2 nearby destroyers. "What kind of insane tactic is that?" shouted Teclon, watching 3 of his best ships disappear in balls of fire. Before anyone could answer, a mining vessel called Soul's Pride approached another Vorthak destroyer. Instead of using weapons, the mining ship extended its industrial excavators, massive mechanical arms designed for tearing apart asteroids. Captain Byung-ho, whose face appeared on the tactical screen, was laughing as his ship literally grabbed the destroyer and started ripping it apart piece by piece. "These things work great on space rocks," Byung-ho's voice crackled over the radio. "Let's see how they work on ugly spaceships." The Vorthak destroyer's hull, designed to withstand plasma cannons and missile impacts, was being peeled open like a can of food. The mining ship's industrial tools were never meant to be weapons, but they were shredding military armor like it was made of paper. Fighter pilot Nari was flying what appeared to be a racing yacht that someone had strapped weapons onto. She was performing maneuvers that should have killed any living being, spinning, diving, and accelerating in ways that defied the laws of physics. Her ship took 3 direct hits from plasma cannons that should have vaporized it, but somehow kept flying. "You want to pick on defenseless planets?" She screamed over the radio in a language the Vorthak computers couldn't translate, though her tone was clearly mocking. "Try picking on someone who hits back." Her little racing ship darted between 2 massive Vorthak battleships, firing missiles. That seemed to home in on the most vulnerable spots. She was flying like someone who had absolutely no fear of death, pulling maneuvers that no sane pilot would attempt. The entire human fleet was fighting like they had never heard of military strategy. Some ships worked together in small groups, others attacked completely alone. They used weapons that weren't weapons, flew ships that weren't warships, and treated the battle like some kind of game. Engineer Kwang-Su was commanding a cargo freighter that had been converted into a weapons platform. His ship was ugly and slow, but it was taking apart Vorthak fighters with surprising efficiency. When the Vorthak commanders tried to contact him to demand his surrender, his response made them even more confused. "We looked at your unbeatable fleet and thought, that's a nice engineering challenge," Kwang-Su said cheerfully, as if he was discussing the weather instead of fighting for his life. "Thanks for keeping us entertained. This is way more fun than hauling cargo." The Vorthak Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds by following proven tactics. They would overwhelm enemies with superior numbers, use their advanced technology to dominate battlefields, and rely on their disciplined military formations to crush any resistance. But these humans didn't seem to know they were supposed to lose. Every time the Vorthak adapted to counter one human tactic, the humans would try something completely different. And their tactics weren't just different, they were completely insane. Teclon watched his carefully organized fleet falling into chaos as these strange beings turned space combat into some kind of chaotic brawl. For the first time in his long military career, he didn't know what to do. The news traveled faster than any spaceship could fly. Across the galaxy, on worlds where the surviving populations had given up all hope, people began hearing impossible stories. Humans had arrived. The strange beings from the Outer Rim were fighting the Vorthak Empire, and somehow they were winning. On the crystal world of Zalathi Prime, now half destroyed and occupied by enemy forces, the few remaining energy, warriors felt something they hadn't experienced in months. One of them, a being called Veltar, whose light form had grown dim with despair, suddenly blazed brighter than he had in years. Captain So Young of the Earth Destroyer Indomitable was coordinating rescue operations when she received an encrypted message from the planet's surface. The transmission was weak and filled with static, but the hope in the alien voice was unmistakable. Unknown human vessel, this is Veltar of the Zalathi Resistance. We have been monitoring your battle communications. Is it true that your people fight without fear? So Young looked around her bridge, where her crew was working frantically to coordinate attacks with alien allies they had met only hours ago. Her tactical officer Sang Min was somehow managing to direct human fighter squadrons alongside Zalathi energy beings, even though they had completely different fighting styles. Fear? So Young laughed into her communicator. Of course we're afraid. We'd be crazy not to be. But being scared never stopped us from doing what needs to be done. There was a long pause before Veltar responded. Your people fight like the stars themselves have gone mad. You attack when you should retreat. You advance when you should surrender, and you keep fighting when any reasonable being would accept defeat. That's because we're not reasonable, So Young replied, watching on her screen as a human cargo ship used its loading crane to grab a Vorthak fighter and throw it into an asteroid. We fight like we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Besides, you should see what we're like when we're really angry. What happened next amazed everyone, including the humans themselves. The arrival of Earth's crazy fleet had done something that superior technology and ancient wisdom couldn't accomplish. It had given the galaxy hope again. On the Keeper homeworld, the few surviving hive minds had been hiding in underground bunkers, their perfect coordination broken by grief and despair. But when they heard human squad leaders giving orders over the radio, something clicked. These humans didn't fight as one unified force. They fought as individuals who chose to work together. Squad. Leader Jin Ho was directing a mixed team of humans and keepers in an assault on a Vorthak supply depot. Instead of giving detailed orders like the Keeper commanders used to do, he just told his people the goal and let them figure out how to achieve it. Listen up, everyone. Jin Ho's voice crackled over the radio to his mixed squad. We need to blow up that depot and rescue the prisoners inside. I don't care how you do it, just get it done and try not to die. The Keeper warriors were shocked. They had spent their entire lives following precise instructions from the hive mind. But watching the humans improvise and adapt in real time taught them something new. Sometimes individual creativity was more powerful than perfect coordination. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the ethereal floating cities, the ancient psychic beings were discovering something incredible. Dr. Hei Wan, a human xenobiologist who had insisted on joining the rescue fleet despite having no military training, was working with ethereal survivors to treat wounded refugees. Your emotional patterns are fascinating, Elder Zephyra told her as they worked together in a makeshift medical station. Your hope is so strong, it's affecting our psychic abilities. We can feel things we haven't felt in centuries. Hai Wan looked up from the alien patient she was treating, a young keeper whose hive connection had been severed by trauma. Hope isn't logical, she explained, while carefully applying human medical techniques to alien physiology. We hope because we choose to hope, not because it makes sense. The ethereal elder's eyes widened as he felt the raw power of human optimism flowing through the psychic plane. For the first time since his cities fell, he could clearly see possible futures where they actually won this war across 3-star systems. The impossible was happening. Coalition forces that had been beaten and broken were regrouping and fighting back with tactics no one had ever seen before. Human engineers were teaching alien scientists that the laws of physics were more like guidelines than absolute rules. Engineer Kyung-soo was working with a team of Zalathi technicians to modify their energy weapons. The aliens watched in amazement as he bypassed safety protocols and overcharged their equipment in ways that should have been impossible. "Your computers say this modification will cause the weapon to explode," one of the Zalathi engineers pointed out nervously. "Yeah, probably," Kyung-Soo agreed cheerfully, continuing to rewire the alien technology. "But it also says there's a 30% chance it will triple the weapon's power output. I like those odds. But what about the 70% chance of explosion?" "Well, if it explodes, at least it'll be a really big explosion. That's something, right?" The beautiful thing about human engineering, as Dr. Haewon explained to a group of amazed ethereal scientists, was that humans never let physics tell them what was impossible. They just found creative ways around the limitations. "When humans first wanted to fly," she told them while demonstrating how to jury-rig alien medical equipment with human spare parts, "our scientists proved mathematically that powered flight was impossible for creatures our size. So we built airplanes anyway, and proved the scientists wrong. The effect on alien morale was extraordinary. Beings who had accepted defeat as inevitable suddenly remembered what it felt like to believe in victory. The Vorthak Empire had built their conquest strategy on a simple principle: superior force always prevails. But they had never faced enemies who grew stronger the more hopeless their situation became. In his command ship, War Master Theklon stared at tactical displays that made no sense. His forces were retreating from battles they should have won easily. Planets that had already surrendered were rebelling again. Worst of all, his own soldiers were starting to question orders for the first time in their lives. "How are we losing?" "To these primitive beings," he demanded from his tactical officers. "Sir, they're not fighting like any enemy we've encountered," came the confused reply. "Every time we adapt to counter their tactics, they change to something completely different. And now they're teaching the other species to fight the same way." For the first time in his long military career, Theklon felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. Not fear of death, which he had faced many times, but fear of the unknown. These humans weren't following any rules he understood, and somehow that was making them incredibly dangerous. The galaxy was learning something that would change everything. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't superior technology or ancient wisdom. It's the absolute refusal to give up when someone needs help. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. In hidden bunkers on conquered worlds, in refugee camps on distant moons, in the darkest corners where survivors had been hiding, everywhere, beings who had given up all hope were hearing the same incredible story. Humans had come to help. The strange species from the far edge of the galaxy was actually fighting the Vorthak Empire, and somehow not losing. On Zalathi Prime, the crystal world that had been the first to fall to the Vorthak invasion, something miraculous was happening. Deep underground in caves that had been turned into refugee shelters, the surviving Zalathi energy warriors felt their powers returning. Their light forms, which had grown dim with despair, began to glow brighter than they had in months. Veltar was one of the last great Zalathi warriors, a being whose energy form had once been bright enough to be seen from orbit. But after watching his beautiful crystal cities crumble and his people enslaved, his light had faded to barely a flicker. He had been preparing to surrender his life force when he received an impossible transmission. Zalathi Resistance Forces. This is Captain So Young of the Earth vessel Indomitable. We're here to help. What's your situation down there? Veltar could barely believe what he was hearing. His people had sent distress calls across the galaxy, but no one had answered. No one had come to help. Until now. "Human vessel," he replied, his voice shaking with emotion he hadn't felt in months. "This is Veltar of the Zalathi Resistance. Are you truly here to fight the Vorthak?" "We're here to kick them off your planet," So Young's voice came back with a confidence that amazed him. "But we could use some local help. Think you and your people are up for one more fight?" On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain So Young was watching something she had never seen before. Her tactical officer Sang Min was somehow coordinating attacks between human fighter pilots and Zalathi energy beings, even though the two species had completely different fighting styles and had never worked together before. "Captain, the Zalathi are asking about our battle tactics," Sang Min reported, looking confused. They want to know why we attack when the odds are against us. So Young laughed as she watched a human cargo ship ram a Vorthak destroyer while a Zelathi warrior provided covering fire with energy blasts. Tell them we're too stubborn to know when we're supposed to quit. When Veltar heard her response, his crystalline form began to glow brighter. Your people fight like the stars themselves. Have gone mad, he told her over the radio. You attack when you should retreat. You advance when you should surrender. And you keep fighting when any reasonable being would accept defeat. That's because we're not reasonable, So Young replied, watching her crew work frantically to coordinate rescue operations across 3 different star systems. We fight like we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Besides, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until we're really angry. What happened next surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. The arrival of Earth's chaotic fleet had accomplished something that all the advanced technology and ancient wisdom in the galaxy couldn't do. It had given everyone hope again. On the Keeper homeworld, the surviving hive minds were experiencing something they had never felt before. For thousands of years, they had fought as one perfectly coordinated entity, every individual following the exact same plan. But watching human squad leaders work taught them something revolutionary. Sometimes individual thinking was more powerful than perfect unity. Squad leader Jin Ho was directing a rescue operation to free Keeper prisoners from a Vorthak labor camp. Instead of giving his mixed team of humans and Keepers detailed instructions like their old commanders used to do, he simply told them the goal and let them figure out how to achieve it. Okay, everyone, here's the deal. Jin Ho's voice crackled over the radio to his diverse squad. We need to get those prisoners out of that camp and blow up their weapons factory while we're at it. I don't care how you do it. Just get creative and try not to get yourselves killed. The Keeper warriors were stunned. They had spent their entire lives following precise orders from the collective mind. But watching the humans improvise and adapt in real time opened up possibilities they had never imagined. Individual creativity, they realized, could be just as powerful as group coordination. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the great ethereal floating cities, ancient psychic beings were discovering something that amazed them. Dr. Haewon, a human scientist, who had insisted on joining the rescue mission, despite having no military training whatsoever, was working alongside ethereal healers to treat wounded refugees from a dozen different species. Your emotional patterns are fascinating, Elder Zephyra told her as they worked together in a makeshift medical station built from salvaged ship parts. Your hope is so powerful, it's affecting our psychic abilities. We can sense things we haven't felt in centuries. Haewon looked up from the young alien patient she was treating, a Keeper whose connection to the hive mind had been severed by trauma, leaving him lost and confused. Using a combination of human psychology and alien medical techniques, she was slowly helping him recover. Hope isn't logical, she explained, while carefully adapting human medical equipment to work on alien physiology. We don't hope because it makes sense. We hope because we choose to hope even when everything looks impossible. The ancient ethereal's psychic senses were overwhelmed by the raw power of human optimism. For the first time since his floating, cities fell from the sky. He could clearly see possible futures where they actually won this war. The humans' irrational belief in victory was literally changing reality around them. Across 3 star systems, something incredible was happening. Coalition forces that had been completely defeated were regrouping and fighting back with tactics no military academy had ever taught. Human engineers were working with alien scientists, showing them that the laws of physics were more like suggestions than absolute rules. Engineer Kyung-soo was in the middle of modifying Zelathi energy weapons when his alien colleagues started panicking. Your modifications will cause a catastrophic overload, one of the Zelathi technicians warned him. The computer says there's a 70% chance the weapon will explode. Yeah, probably, Kyung-soo agreed cheerfully, continuing to rewire their equipment in ways that violated every safety protocol ever written. But there's also a 30% chance it will triple the weapon's power output. I like those odds. But what about the explosion risk? Well, if it explodes, at least, it'll be a really spectacular explosion. That's got to count for something, right? This was the beautiful thing about human engineering. As Dr. Hay-Won explained to a group of fascinated ethereal scientists, humans never let physics tell them what was impossible. They just found creative ways around the limitations. When humans first wanted to fly, she told them, while demonstrating how to jury-rig alien medical equipment using human spare parts and pure determination, our scientists proved mathematically that powered flight was impossible for creatures our size. So we built airplanes anyway, and proved the scientists wrong by actually flying. The effect on galaxy-wide morale was extraordinary. Beings who had accepted defeat as inevitable suddenly remembered what it felt like to believe in victory. The Vorthak Empire had built their entire conquest strategy on one simple principle: superior force always wins. But they had never encountered enemies who actually grew stronger the more hopeless their situation became. In his flagship, War Master, Theklon stared at tactical displays that showed his forces retreating from battles they should have won easily. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something completely foreign to his nature, genuine fear of the unknown. The final battle was about to begin above the Vorthak homeworld, and everyone knew this would decide the fate of the entire galaxy. For months, the combined human and coalition forces had been pushing the Vorthak Empire back system by system, but now they faced the enemy's last desperate gambit. The Vorthak homeworld was a dark, heavily fortified planet, surrounded by the largest military fleet anyone had ever seen. But that wasn't what made Admiral Young-Su's blood run cold as he studied the tactical displays on his flagship. It was the massive structure built into the planet's largest moon, a weapon so big it could be seen with the naked eye from millions of miles away. "Sir, our sensors are picking up massive energy readings from that moon base," reported his science officer, her voice tight with worry. "The power levels are off the charts. Whatever they're building over there, it's big enough to destroy entire solar systems." Young-Su had been expecting this. The Vorthak Empire hadn't conquered most of the galaxy by playing fair. When their normal tactics failed, they always had something worse waiting in reserve. He opened communications to all ships in the human coalition fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Young-Su. The enemy has activated what appears to be a planet-killing weapon. The energy readings suggest they can destroy our entire fleet and probably several star systems with one shot." Across hundreds of ships, human and alien crews fell silent as they absorbed this information. They had come so far, fought so hard, only to face a weapon that could erase them all in an instant. But then Chief Engineer Myung-hoon's voice crackled over the radio from his converted cargo hauler, the Busan Express. "Admiral, I'm looking at these sensor readings and I've got an idea. It's completely crazy and will probably get us all killed, but it might just work." Young-Su almost smiled despite the desperate situation. After months of fighting alongside, humans, the alien coalition forces, had learned that when humans said something was completely crazy, it usually meant they were about to attempt the impossible. "What do you need, Chief?" Young-Su asked. "Give me 2 hours and about 50 volunteers willing to do something absolutely insane," Myung-hoon replied, and everyone could hear him typing frantically on his computers. "I'm going to need mining, ships, cargo haulers, and anyone with industrial equipment. We're going to fly right into that weapon." In the Vorthak Command Center on the moon base, War Master Theklon was personally overseeing the charging of their ultimate weapon. The massive device had taken decades to build and contained enough destructive power to crack planets in half. Once fired, it would eliminate the human fleet and send a message to the galaxy that resistance was futile. "How long until the weapon is ready?" he asked his chief technician. 2 hours, War Master. The energy matrix needs time to reach full power, but once it does, we can destroy every enemy ship in the system with a single blast." Theklon nodded with satisfaction. Let the humans celebrate their small victories. Soon they would all be nothing but space dust, and the galaxy would remember why the Vorthak Empire was undefeatable. But he didn't know that 50 human volunteers were already climbing into mining ships and cargo haulers, preparing to attempt something that no sane being would ever consider. Captain Yoon-Su was leading the volunteer squadron in her converted asteroid mining ship. The vessel had never been designed for combat, but her crew had installed the most advanced drilling equipment available. Behind her flew dozens of other industrial ships, each one piloted by humans who had volunteered for what everyone knew. So it was probably a suicide mission. "Okay, everyone, here's the plan," Myung-hoon explained over the radio as the volunteer ships approached the massive weapon. "Instead of trying to destroy this thing from the outside, we're going to fly inside it and rewire the power systems. We're basically going to turn their planet killer into the galaxy's biggest firework." Pilot Ari, flying escort in her modified racing fighter, couldn't stop laughing. Only humans would look at a doomsday weapon and think, "I bet we can reprogram that thing." The approach to the weapon was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever experienced. The massive structure was the size of a small city, crackling with energy that could vaporize their ships instantly. Vorthak fighters swarmed around it like angry insects, trying to stop the human assault. But the coalition forces had learned from months of fighting alongside humans. They kept the enemy fighters busy, while the volunteer mining ships flew directly into the weapon's energy matrix, using their industrial drilling equipment to bore through armor that was never meant to be penetrated from the inside. "We're in," Yun-Soo reported, as her mining ship broke through into the weapon's core chamber. "Beginning rerouting procedures now." What followed was the most dangerous engineering project in galactic history. Working inside a weapon that could explode at any moment, the human volunteers used mining lasers, cargo handling equipment, and pure determination to rewire alien technology they barely understood. "The good news is I think this is going to work," Myung-hoon announced cheerfully as sparks flew around him. "The bad news is, when this thing fires, it's going to create the biggest explosion anyone has ever seen. We probably won't survive." "To see it? Worth it," came the response from multiple ships as the volunteers continued their impossible work. In the Vorthak command center, alarms were blaring as technicians tried to figure out what was happening to their ultimate weapon. "Sir, there are intruders inside the main firing chamber. They're modifying our power systems." "Stop them," Theklon screamed, but it was too late. The weapon fired exactly as designed, releasing enough energy to destroy a solar system. But instead, targeting the human fleet, the modified power systems redirected the blast directly into the heart of the Vorthak armada. The Empire's own ultimate weapon tore through their defenses like tissue paper. Hundreds of warships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were vaporized instantly. The supposedly impregnable Vorthak homeworld found itself completely defenseless as its own doomsday device eliminated its protective fleet. Across the system, Vorthak ships began surrendering. Their commanders, who had spent their lives believing that superior force always won, suddenly understood what they had been fighting against. Warmaster Theklon sat in his ruined command center, staring at the empty space where his mighty fleet used to be. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what made humans so dangerous. It wasn't their technology, which was often inferior to other species. It wasn't their physical strength or their military training. It was their absolute, stubborn refusal to accept that any fight was truly hopeless. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't surrender. They found creative ways to turn those odds in their favor. The galaxy was free, and humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or superior technology, but through the most human trait of all, the simple refusal to give up when someone needed help. As rescue ships spread across the liberated systems, beings of 100 different species worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. And at the center of it all were the humans, still making jokes, still finding creative solutions to impossible problems, and still absolutely refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. The age of Vorthak tyranny was over. The age of galactic cooperation had begun. And it had all started with one simple human principle. When someone calls for help, you answer.